It was 2017 when Nintendo Switch had blessed us with the second entry into the Xenoblade universe, a game that is pretty much responsible for my return to the RPG genre. Now fast forward 5 years later, and now the series is much more popular than it ever was before. The third entry of the series is finally here, and is this game the best of the trilogy? Well, we're here to find out about that in this review of Xenoblade Chronicles 3. First and foremost, I want to talk about this game's presentation. You will instantly notice the difference between the character designs found in Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and the third entry of the series. Most notably is the character proportions and the designs of the female cast, which caused a lot of controversy within the community when the second game released. Even though I could care less as long as the characters are well developed and the story along with its gameplay is solid, then I have no complaints. But you can tell that Monolith Soft took some liberties to dial down the fan service, but in my opinion, the design still left some wiggle room for the fans who enjoy that stuff in their JRPGs. Now, just like Xenoblade 2, the anime art style and its direction is still here, and the characters are even more expressive than ever before, which adds a great touch and attention to detail. The world of Ionios itself is quite the marvel to look at, but I also can't help but to wonder how much more awesome the game would have looked graphically if this game was on a much more powerful hardware. I'm still amazed at how Monolith Soft was able to squeeze as much power out of this outdated console to present such a beautiful game. But what's a JRPG without its story and world building? I won't go into too much detail about the game's story, but it will require some spoilers, and this review won't have any story spoilers at all. I will only summarize the premise of the story so you can get a feel of how the game actually is in terms of story. So the story takes place on a new planet called Ionios, which the trailer hints that this world is a merge between Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and 2 worlds. There are two factions at war with one another for survival. You have the Kevis faction, which represents Xenoblade Chronicles 1 world, and then you have Agnes, which represents Xenoblade Chronicles 2 world. Now, each faction has a queen who both look familiar if you played the previous two games. So why are they fighting? Well, in Ionios, the humans of this world are given a 10-year lifespan before they expire. The goal is to kill the opposing faction in order to steal their life energy, which is then absorbed into the winning faction's flame clock. The soldier's life is tied to the flame clock, which means they have to continue to fight in order to keep the flame clock full at all times, up until they make it to their final months. When this happens, they will have a homecoming ceremony, which is where the soldiers meet their queen, and she sends them off to God know where, and they will never return. So the people of this world are born to fight and look forward to making it to the end of their lifespan to meet the queen. Now, the story introduces us to 6 main cast members who represents both Kevis and Agnes. Noah, who is an Offseer who represents Kevis, and he is also joined up with his best friends and war buddies Lance and Uni, as they were ordered to go on a special mission, a mission that would change the course of their lives in the entire game. Now, this special mission is where they also meet the other 3 cast members, which is Mio, who is a cat girl Offseer of Agnes. She fights alongside her friend Senna and Tyon, as they were tasked to go on the same mission as Noah and his team. They eventually come head to head with one another, while the third party faction, which remains a secret at the beginning of the game, decides to jump in and break up the fight. The leader of this third faction is named Vandam. Now, he tells the 6 cast members that this war is a pointless sham, and there's a bigger threat puppeteering this perpetual war cycle. He eventually sacrificed his life to save the cast when a creature named Mobius shows up to take them down. He grants them the power of the orb Boros, which allows them to transform into this fusion form called Interlink. Now, this allows them to go toe-to-toe with Mobius, and after the fight, the cast is now set off on an adventure to the great sword called Swordmark. Now, they are now enemies of both Kevis and Agnes, and all I can say is that this story gets bonkers. Just like any other Xenoblade game, the story goes completely left field, and not in a bad way, in a good way. So they pretty much continue that tradition from there, but there's still a lot of story left that I really have questions about, because by the time I make it to the end of the game, I was left with more questions than answers. So you definitely have to stay tuned for my spoiler video, where I give my overall thoughts about the story altogether. Just like the previous 2 Xenoblade games, the cast is just fantastic. I love the banter between the party members. The voice acting is a big improvement from the second game, and I have to say that Uni and Lance were my favorite among the cast. I am quite surprised that Nintendo allowed the amount of cursing in this title from both of these characters. If they pulled back the censoring just a bit more, Uni and Lance would have easily gave this game a mature rating, for sure.
You muppet! Never do that again!
Come on, you're already soaking wet anyway. What difference does it make?
The difference is, you're an asshole. What's nothing difference? Oh, I've got water in my ears now.
Now, let's talk about the gameplay, which is one of my favorite aspects of Xenoblade Chronicles. I clocked in about 110 hours by the time I reached the end of the game. Now, the story isn't that long. I spent 110 hours of pure level grinding, questing, and exploring the world of Ionios itself. Now, Monolith Soft weren't lying when they said that this will be the biggest, most ambitious Nintendo Switch game yet when it comes to open worlds. And this game is huge. And each time I thought I completed a region, only to find out that I haven't even put a dent into it. Once you gain certain abilities for travel, you'll be able to travel into places within said region you could never reach before. But that's not all. The world doesn't fully open up till chapter 5, and then you are introduced to more lands to traverse. The quality of life changes is a godsend. Monolith Soft really took fan feedback under consideration. Exploration was a pain in the ass from the previous games because the quest marker or main story marker was hard to read. But in this game, they actually gave the player a pathfinder that would leave a red path on the ground for you to follow to your destination. Now, just to let you know, even though that it makes things easier, it doesn't mean that this pathfinder will give you a shortcut or a much easier route to get to your destination. In fact, the pathfinder will, even though it will take you to the destination that you need to go, it will take you to some of the most dangerous areas to get to where you need to go. So you also got to keep that in mind. Now, it made questing so much easier, and not only that, quest organizing is much more easier, so it's not a hassle to find the quest that you're really looking for, which, thank God, I'm glad that they have done that. Now, speaking of quests, the meat of the game's story is found in the quests. You will find some of the best story parts found in these quests, which is also my biggest problem with the story structure of the game. Some of the side quests felt like major important story pieces, but regulated as a side quest, which means you can skip the major details that is left out of the main story. There's a lot of quality quests found in this game that ties into character relationships, character stories, and you can also gather a lot of these quests by speaking to NPCs and building affinity with them. So this is pretty much a way to inspire you or to give you the incentive to keep revisiting certain areas to talk to NPCs, because they always have something different to say each time, which then you gather new information and you go to the campsites to discuss it with your party members in order to unlock these said quests. You can also camp out with your party member where you can level up your characters with the bonus XP you earned. And normally I use this mechanic once I make it to the end of the game, because I've gained so much bonus XP, I end up going to 10 to 15 and sometimes 20 levels by the time I make it to the end of the game. Or you can cook meals that you learned from different recipes on your adventure. You can also wash your clothes because battle damage is also shown in your characters. Clean your clothes does absolutely nothing as far as gameplay mechanics, but it's a small attention to detail that really stands out with this game. So, what about the combat? Now, I will say this, the combat is more streamlined and by far the most superior to the previous two entries. Now, Monolith Soft was able to blend both Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and 2 gameplay into one game, and it's balanced really well. This time, all 6 of your party members are all on the field at once, which is something that Xenoblade Chronicles 2 Torna DLC was hinting at a few years ago. I always wanted something like this from my JRPGs, and the best part about it is, this third entry allows you to switch to any party member you want during battle, which is something I could not figure out why this feature was missing from the previous 2 games in the past. Now, those of you who don't know how the combat works in Xenoblade Chronicles, the combat is action-based, but your party members auto-attack. The only time you press buttons is to press when your skill arts that you assign to your characters are ready when the gauge is full. This allows you to time the inputs for cancel animations into other skill arts. Not only that, positioning is much more important than ever before. There are more skill arts that require you to position yourself either behind, in front, or on the sides in order to get the most out of those skills. You can also chain attack with your party, which is somewhat like a mini game within itself. If you mastered it, you can take millions of hit points from your enemies. Then there's also Interlink Abilities, where you and your soul partner fuse together to create a being called Ouroboros. Now, I was expecting much more out of this mechanic, but for me, it's nothing more than a get out of jail free mechanic, where if I'm near death, I just fuse my characters together and keep aggro while my other party members essentially just get themselves together, heal up, and maybe revive a couple of the party members if they're down and out for the count. But other than that, there's really not much to it. Now, they do have their own skill tree that you can modify your interlink characters, your Ouroboros, but I found myself not really relying too much on it, you know, and it's kind of a shame that, you know, for it to be the highlight as far as the main story is concerned, it really doesn't really play too much of a big impact as far as the combat is concerned. Now, the biggest highlight, which I find the best mechanic of the game, is the hero system. This is where you meet other characters who are called heroes and act as a guest character who will join your party. Now, these characters act as a 7th party member, but you cannot control them, similar to like Final Fantasy Tactics or any other game that has guest characters where you just essentially can't control them, similar to also Final Fantasy 12. Now, the hero system is also part of the newest mechanic called the class system, which I love in most of my JRPGs. Now, each hero is completely optional and have their own storyline attached to them. Now, the hero represents a new class when you recruit them into your party. The fun part about it is that you can recruit them at any time as long as the main story unlocks other regions in which they are located. Now, there are about 17 heroes, which is an additional 17 classes added to the 6 standard classes that the main cast begin with by default. Now, this class system allows you to create so many different custom builds. But what makes it much more fun and interesting is each hero, upon unlock, is granted to one of the main cast members first. You have to learn the class with the other party members who wasn't inherited that class. So in order to do that, you have to either have the hero join your party or be in your party fighting alongside you, or have the inherited cast member of the class. They must have that class equipped to them during combat. But the amount of time it takes for a party member to learn the class is based on the compatibility with that class. So if their compatibility is rank D or lower, it means that it takes much longer for them to learn that class. Then you can cross-class your skill arts once you master the class and its skill arts abilities. So it's so much you can do, so many different combinations, and you already have the Xenoblade community already coming up with tier lists for the different classes and who they are best suited for each party member. And I found it very, very interesting. So there's a lot of room for creativity when it comes to this game. And not only that, the gem system has also returned from Xenoblade Chronicles 1, but much more streamlined, which you can also equip on your characters to enhance your character performance in battle with the chosen class. And that's essentially it as far as the overall package for the game. The game, I just enjoyed every last bit of it. You will find your time spending a lot of time mostly exploring and level grinding. Now, as far as the main story is concerned and its difficulty, if you pretty much level grind your ass off in this game, you're going to pretty much become overpowered and you would storm through the last boss. Like, the last boss was cakewalk to me. By the time I made it to the last boss, I was essentially level 84 or 85, and I just completely stomped the last boss. So I would say this: if you want to have a good time with this game or you want to be challenged, just start the game off on hard mode if you really want to be challenged. And as far as the story is concerned and the length and time, I think it's a reasonable time and length for the actual story overall when it comes to the game. Now, the downsides to the game experience all in itself is the story itself. The game have left me pretty much with so many questions rather than things being answered. And not only that, a lot of the important story bits is locked behind quests, which means you have to spend more time questing in order to piece together the overall story. So if you end up skipping a lot of the quests and make it to the end, some of the character interactions may not make sense to you. It's because you haven't tried the quest that earlier on introduced you to said characters that your main cast is being introduced to or interacting with. So, I mean, that is pretty much my gripe there. And also, like I said before, as far as the hardware is concerned, you experience quite a few frame rate dips, even though that Xenoblade Chronicles 3 frame rate is much more consistent at 30 frames most of the time compared to Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and I believe the first game. This game, when the game gets hectic, where there's so much going on the screen at a time, it definitely experiences dip and slow down the frame rate, which I do have an issue with. And like I said, it doesn't ruin the experience, but I will say this: every time I was traversing the beautiful world of Ionios, I still kept saying in my head, man, if this was on better hardware, I can imagine what Monolith Soft could have possibly done with this game as far as locations are concerned. I'm pretty sure they could push the boundaries even farther, but I'm surprised that they was able to do so much with the Nintendo Switch when it came to this game. But overall, I enjoyed the game, and I would definitely give this game a 8 out of 10. Really enjoyed it. And as far as where does this stack up against Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and 2 in terms of story, is this the best in the trilogy? You will pretty much have to wait and hear that opinion in my spoiler video sometime later this week. So if you like this video, make sure you hit that like button, hit the subscribe button to pretty much just hear my overall thoughts on many RPGs coming up, and also hit that bell to be notified, so when I post my next review or my next discussion video on more upcoming JRPGs, you'll definitely be informed. So this is MugenLord signing off. I'll see you Game Fiends later. Peace out.